The day after my grandfather's funeral, the house felt empty in a way I had never known before, not quiet, but hollow, like something important had been pulled out and nothing had filled the space yet, and while everyone argued about furniture and papers, my mother suddenly found his old savings book at the bottom of a drawer. She didn't even open it, she barely looked at it, she just snorted and said it was useless junk, something from another time, and before I could say a word, she tossed it straight into the trash. I felt something sink in my chest, not anger, not shock, just a deep sadness, because that small worn book had been in my grandfather's hands for decades, and now it was treated like dirt. I said nothing, because I had learned early that speaking up only made things worse, and while no one was watching, I quietly took it out of the trash, wiped it clean, and slipped it into my bag. At that moment, I didn't expect anything from it, I didn't imagine money or surprises, I just couldn't let the last piece of him disappear like that. My mother ruled the house with a loud voice and sharp words, always confident, always sure she knew best, and after my grandfather died, she acted as if everything that belonged to him already belonged to her, untouchable, unquestionable. I was just the quiet one, the background presence, the one who listened and endured, the one who was told to stay out of adult matters. That night, lying awake, I opened the savings book under the dim light of my phone, flipping through the yellowed pages, seeing careful handwriting, dates, stamps, years of discipline and patience, and something inside me stirred, not excitement, but a soft, cautious curiosity. A few days later, without telling anyone, I went to the bank, expecting nothing more than confirmation that it was empty or outdated, maybe even closed long ago. The building itself felt intimidating, all glass and polished floors, a place where people like my mother felt powerful and people like me tried to stay invisible. I stood in line quietly, my heart beating faster than it should have, telling myself not to hope, not to imagine, not to make a fool of myself. When I finally handed the book to the teller, she frowned slightly, then typed something into her computer, then looked again, and her expression changed. She excused herself and walked away with the book, leaving me standing there, suddenly unsure if I had done something wrong. Minutes passed, then more minutes, and people behind me started whispering, annoyed, impatient, while I stood frozen, feeling small, helpless, wondering if I should just leave. Then a man in a dark suit approached, his face serious, his posture confident, the kind of confidence that comes from authority, and he looked at me closely before speaking. He asked me to come with him, and when I hesitated, unsure, embarrassed, he leaned closer and said quietly, almost gently, "Don't go anywhere." At that moment, I felt the weight of every year I had been overlooked, every time my voice was ignored, every moment I had been told I was nothing important, and I had no idea yet that the book my mother had thrown away was about to change far more than just my life. I followed him through a quiet hallway into a small office where the air felt heavier, more serious, and he placed the savings book carefully on the desk as if it were something fragile, something valuable, and asked me to sit down. My hands were cold, my thoughts scattered, and I kept telling myself this was a misunderstanding, that any moment he would apologize and send me away, but instead he asked about my grandfather, when he opened the account, whether he ever spoke to me about it, and with every question my confusion grew. I answered honestly, softly, explaining that my grandfather was a quiet man, careful, proud in a gentle way, that he trusted banks more than people, and that he never talked about money, only about patience and doing things right. The man nodded slowly, then turned the computer screen slightly toward me, and I saw numbers that didn't make sense at first, too many zeros, figures that felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life, not mine. I shook my head instinctively, thinking there had to be a mistake, because people like us didn't have accounts like that, people like my grandfather didn't leave behind something that could change everything, but the man explained calmly that the account had been active for decades, quietly growing, untouched, protected, and legally transferred to me through documents my grandfather had arranged long before his death. My chest tightened, not with joy, but with fear, because suddenly I understood why my mother had always dismissed him, why she had never cared to listen when he spoke, why power and noise had always mattered more to her than patience. The man told me to wait again, to stay seated, because there were procedures to follow, confirmations to make, and as I sat there, staring at the wall, I felt small and exposed, like I had stepped into a world that wasn't meant for me. Hours seemed to pass, and with every passing minute, quiet hope began to replace the helplessness I had lived with for so long. Not hope for wealth, but hope that my grandfather had seen me, had trusted me, had chosen me in a house where I was rarely chosen for anything. When I finally left the bank, the sky looked different, not brighter, just clearer, and I walked home slowly, carrying the weight of a truth that no one else knew yet. At home, my mother complained about bills and inconveniences, about how unfair life was to her, and I listened in silence because patience had always been my shield. That night, I didn't sleep much, not from excitement, but from the quiet realization that something was shifting, that the balance of power in my life was no longer fixed, and that for the first time, I didn't need to raise my voice or prove myself to anyone. I only needed to wait. I didn't tell my mother anything, not because I was afraid, but because I had learned that some truths grow stronger when protected by silence. Days passed, then weeks, and on the surface nothing changed. I still lived in the same house, still listened to the same sharp comments, still watched her make decisions as if the world belonged to her alone. But inside me, something had settled, a quiet certainty that did not rush, did not demand attention, it simply existed. The bank contacted me again, politely, respectfully, explaining procedures, verification, legal steps, and every call felt unreal, like they were speaking to a version of me that no one at home could see. I followed every instruction carefully, signed papers slowly, asked questions softly, never once raising my voice, because patience was something my grandfather had taught me without words. Meanwhile, my mother's confidence grew louder. She talked about selling things, about plans, about control, assuming that nothing stood in her way, assuming that I would always stay in the background. I watched her with a strange calm, not anger, not resentment, just observation, because power looks different once you no longer need it to feel safe. One afternoon, she announced she was going to the bank herself to sort out what she called family matters, and for the first time, I felt no fear at all, only a steady sense of readiness. When she came back, her face was tight, confused, her words clipped, because the bank had refused to speak to her, because suddenly doors that were always open had closed without explanation. She accused, she demanded, she raised her voice at me, but I remained quiet, not out of weakness, but out of patience, because justice was already moving, slowly, carefully, in ways she could not see yet. I continued to wait, because I understood now that the strongest position is not the loudest one, it is the one built on truth, and truth, once set in motion, does not stop. Finally, the day came when everything shifted completely, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first, and yet with a force that could not be ignored. The bank called me personally, and this time there was no hesitation in their voice, only clarity, authority, and respect. They told me to come in immediately, that all legal verifications had been completed, and that the account was fully mine, protected, and recognized officially, and I felt a strange mixture of disbelief, relief, and something I had not allowed myself to feel in years, vindication. When I arrived, the manager met me at the door, serious, professional, but with a hint of admiration in his eyes, and as he opened the account documents in front of me, I realized the scale of what my grandfather had left behind. Not just money, but a legacy of careful planning, protection, and trust, all entrusted to me, the quiet granddaughter he had always believed in. My mother followed, her face pale, her confidence shaken, demanding explanations, raising her voice, threatening, and I listened calmly, not reacting, not pleading, because words were no longer necessary. The documents spoke for themselves, every signature, every stamp, every legal clause proving what she refused to see, that I now held the power she had always assumed belonged to her. The manager finally spoke, firmly, looking her in the eye, and said, "Ma'am, this is official. There is nothing further you can do. Please step back." I watched my mother's fury collide with her helplessness, and for the first time, I felt a quiet triumph that did not need applause or recognition, only the satisfaction of knowing that patience and silence had carried me farther than any shouting ever could. I took the savings book in my hands, its worn pages suddenly heavy with meaning, and walked out of the bank with a steady heart, my posture confident, my voice unneeded, my presence enough. The sun felt warmer, the air cleaner, the world suddenly mine in ways I had never imagined, and I understood then what my grandfather had known all along, that true power is given not by noise or force, but by trust, planning, and the courage to wait. That evening, I returned home, placed the book carefully on a shelf, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and smiled for the first time in years, not with arrogance, not with pride, but with the quiet knowledge that justice, patience, and integrity had finally prevailed, and nothing, not even the loudest voices or the strongest threats, could take that away from me.